factors and brain health. We have 4 excellent speakers that we're looking forward to listen to. The first one is Lars Nyberg, who's professor of neuroscience and psychology at Umeå University and the director of Umeå Center for Functional Brain Imaging and Wallenberg Center for Molecular Medicine. And also, very important, my former PhD supervisor. So please, Lars.
Thank you, CJ. I was sort of expecting a more dramatic introduction, but I'm happy with this one.
You just wait.
So I will actually be talking a bit about predicting the future. Yeah, so we'll shift gears a little bit. That's, as we know, quite hard. We have several examples how hard it is to predict the future. I'll give you a few examples. This one by Western Union. The telephone has too many flaws to be a serious tool for communication. I guess they regretted that. Decca Records, bands with guitars are on their way out. No thank you to Beatles. I guess someone lost his or her job. Our former Minister of Communication in Sweden, Ines Uusmann. Everyone talks about the internet, but it may not be here to stay. So, tricky business predicting the future. And I will take on this task to ask the question, what will memory aging look like for our grandchildren? So I guess this is just a daunting task as the other ones. So when you predict the future, it's good to start with history. So as you may know, in Sweden, we have very good records over a very long time. Here's a graph spanning some 800 years. Had a very stable level of population for this span, and at 1750, the life expectancy at birth was about 35 years. And that was what we saw for several hundred years. But then things started to change in Sweden and in many other countries like Germany. So say from 1850 to 2000, we more than doubled life expectancy from say about 45 to close to 90 years. So this is a super amazing change, and it continues still. The World Health Organization has looked into it, and they have made some projections, some predictions of the future, and they expect that by 2050, the proportion of the world's population over 60 years will nearly double from today's 12% to 22%. So it's going to change a lot. The pace is much faster now than it has been ever. And as a result of this, pretty much all countries face major challenges to really make sure that their social and healthcare systems are ready to make the most out of this demographic shift. Because really, as with every coin, this demographic shift also has two sides. On the one hand, we may portray ourselves like this. Harriet Thompson, 92 years, finishing the San Diego Marathon. So maybe not before Christine finishing, but I mean, it's still super amazing. But what we meet more in our studies is sort of illustrated by this old man. People are lonely. As we heard, they may be depressed, and they complain about problems with their memory. So he has these memory stickers all over the apartment. So the most common complaint we see in our studies is that you worry about brain health and memory problems, so you cannot live an independent life. So when people say, I worry about my memory, what do they mean? Well, I think we heard a little bit about it in Ullman's presentation. We have many different memory systems. We have facts, semantic memory, tend to be stable as we heard. We have cognitive and motor skills, playing musical instruments. These are pretty stable. This is not what people worry about. Instead, we tend to have these situations. What should I buy from the store? what was the name of this person, and where and when did we meet, and where did I park my car. Maybe even some of you have suffered problems in these memory domains. And scientific term for this is episodic memory, remembering what to buy, where you parked your car, when you met a certain person. And typically when people complain about their memory, this is the type of memory they complain about. So one would think that it would be easy for us scientists sort of to pin down when does episodic memory begin to decline. People have looked into it for many years, and you have actually very many different answers. One answer is very late, unless you suffer from some form of dementia. You can contrast this with very early, already in the 20s, a bit depressing. This is perhaps what our data support, and I think what we saw previously, that on average you see a decline around age 60, 65. But I think the most important point here is that it varies a lot. You have big differences between people. So we have looked into this in quite a few studies, and we have been running a longitudinal study in northern Sweden, in Umeå, the city of birch trees. So we call the project the Betla study. And here we have followed people and charted within individual how their memory changed over time. And here is an example. It's quite messy, right? You may see a downward going shift. People start at different levels when they go into the study. Some may show a very steep decline, others go up for a long time, and then they start to decline. So marked individual differences, as Ullman also told about in his presentation. So I think in our Lifebrain project, a big goal is to try to understand a bit more what causes this variation in starting levels and rate of memory aging. What are the key contributing factors? And as we heard, genetic factors, they are super important. And this is shown in twin studies. As Ullman showed, if anything, the genetic influence tend to be greater as we get older. So also now a big series of GWAS studies trying to identify specific genes that are of relevance here. So we have looked at it in Betula. We have this mess, these spaghetti plots, but you can apply some statistical analysis to it and bring order to it. So what we see then is that we have a majority, about 2/3. They show stability up until age 60, and then they start to show moderate decline. We have this group that start out at a much lower level and then show accelerated change. And then some 15 to 20% in our sample show stability in memory over 20, 25 years. So saying that memory gets worse as we get older is clearly a big oversimplification. You have very big individual differences. We have looked at how these play out in relation to dementia. We have some average number here. We have about twice as high for this declining group and about half as many in this maintaining group. So of course then in Lifebrain, in Betla, we have started to wonder who are they? We have looked at the restricted set of variables so far, and if we compare this black group with the red, we see that in this red group we have people with lower education, as we heard about before the coffee break. Many are not working, and we have a higher percentage of carriers of the detrimental ApoE4 allele. To do the same comparison, black versus green, we see that in the green group, we have higher level of education, they are more physically active, and they have a positive family situation, also higher percentage of females in that group. And this is something we want to study more, and there are of course many other variables that could be important to consider. And I guess one could also take a qualitative approach and simply ask people, If you ask people who have lived to 100 or longer, you may ask them, like with a sports journalist, how does it feel? You may ask these old people, what's the secret behind a long and healthy life? So you may think to yourself, what would you answer? Well, here is one example. Eat delicious things as sushi, noodles, and beef stew. You had it at the tip of your tongue, right? Yeah. This answer was given by Misao Okawa to Japan Times, oldest ever in Japan. Susanna Mushat-Jones, bacon and egg. She also added, for the most of the time not having been married. That goes a bit against what I said about this positive family situation, but that was Susanna's view. So actually, I mean, there are more examples. So when people are asked, they come into, it could be porridge, it could be a big glass of beer every day, it could be a scotch, I mean, but they mention something having to do with the diet. So this is probably a super relevant factor, and it's becoming a part in many intervention studies. And it relates strongly to physical activity. Gert may show something about this in his presentation later on, but I think at the mechanistic level, there are clear overlaps between how diet and physical activity may support cognition through having an influence on the brain. We can move on. Cognitively stimulating activities. We heard a lot about education. And Ullman helped me already. These are data by Martin Lövdén from Betula. You see the solid line here, average education, lower than average, higher than average. So you have clearly an intercept difference, but really similarities in change over time. So an important factor for intercept and level, but maybe not so much for change per se. Profession is discussed a lot. Some epidemiological data suggest that this could be a very good form of cognitive stimulation. And then we have, of course, active training. We heard about the nice project in Santé with meditation. When it comes to memory, people have tried to have directed memory training, and there the results are more mixed. Sometimes you see effects on what you train, but it's super difficult to get transfer to non-trained domains. And here's people still debate whether we should train longer. It was nice to see the 18-month in the Santé study. And we have taken an app approach here. So we have developed an app that people can download and play in the first pilot study for 3 months, and then they can play a lot. So we can distribute it, we can reach out to the community and see whether this can be a form of cognitively stimulating activity. And then also, as Gail showed us in finger, you combine different things, cardio monitoring, diet advice, physical activity. They use our memory training protocol. And here's a nice example of Christina, and they combine physical activity, biking, with virtual reality. So you can really also challenge the cognitive system by having people navigate while they perform this physical activity. So I think this is a nice example of a route where we could go. So will positive lifestyle changes gradually lead to better cognition? Well, I think one of the best cases here is the Flynn effect, where we see that for successive generations, there tend to be a not so slight increase in IQ levels. And Flynn himself wrote, "It is as if some unseen hand is propelling scores upward at the rate of about 6 IQ points per decade." How does this happen? Well, we still don't know, but these are some factors that have been discussed. Better nutrition, again, diet, education, health, and rising standards of living. When it comes to dementia, we also see actually some positive trends in recent studies. Here's an example from the Kungsholmen project in Stockholm, looking at 20-year changes in dementia and finding decreasing incidence over this time period. And I think this has also been shown in the Framingham study. And Xu and Laura Fratiglione and others in the Stockholm project suggested that the decreased incidence of dementia over time likely reflects time-related changes in multiple risk and protective factors. And they specifically mention lower blood pressure, increased physical activity, and stimulating leisure activities. So again, a link perhaps between brain disorders and active lifestyle. The idea we have, as Oman described in the work on brain maintenance, is that the reason why we can see these type of positive influences is because these genetic and lifestyle variables influence different parts of the brain, and not least the hippocampal region. When we look in Betula and we map out here cross-sectional and also longitudinal, we see that on average it starts to decline at age 60, but you also see these small gray dots. They represent individual persons. So there are people who are 80-year-olds who have an hippocampus that is at least the size of the average 30-year-old. So again, as we saw for memory, marked heterogeneity when it comes to brain aging. So in Lifebrain, we like to take advantage of the big power we can get by pooling data from the consortia that participate. And this is work that Tetjana Gorbach is doing now. She's looking at this in various databases that are part of the Lifebrain project. We tend to see that those who have less hippocampal atrophy also show less memory decline. And what we like to do next is to look at this in more detail and see which genetic and lifestyle factors may contribute. So we're back to the two sides of the coin. We still have challenges, of course. Many countries we see still poverty, malnutrition is not over. We still see in several countries that many kids don't have access to schools. I think in particular girls. We have increase in diabetes and obesity as a threat, and physical inactivity. But then, other side of the coin is that, as shown by Hans Rosling and others, globally today, fewer live in extreme poverty. More get through primary education. In general, there is a lowering of blood pressure, which is likely a super important factor. Better nutrition, we have seen the Flynn effect, and reduced dementia incidence. So what about the prediction? What will memory aging look like for our grandchildren? Well, I think better than for us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lars. So we in this session, we decided that it's probably difficult to maintain questions over 4 speakers. So we'll have questions after each speaker. So questions for Lars?
Working memory training.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Very interesting talk, Lars. So what do you think about the way children now grow up with digital media?
Yeah.
So do you think, does this cast some shadow of doubt regarding your positive outlook?
No, thank you, Emre. I think it's good. I sometimes have a picture on that. In Betel, it's a too recent addition for us to have strong data on. But I think there too we have 2 sides of the coin. It can be a stimulation. It can be beneficial. You learn things, but it may also contribute to more physical inactivity. And I think there were some German studies actually on this. So, it's probably a trade-off there. It has both positive and negative sides. So, against sort of dismissing it as only a threat factor.
Final question? Yep.
I have a different question, because if you speak in these studies of shrinkage or atrophy of hippocampus, are you also interested in the reason for this atrophy, for example, trauma?
I think it could be multiple reasons. Trauma could be one of them. We have looked into stress in BETLA project. The other idea is that you may have a shrinking hippocampus if you are sort of exposed to higher stress levels. We have rather found evidence that a smaller hippocampus may be sort of a vulnerability factor there, so it comes before. It is perhaps explaining why some, but not others, are developing stress-related disorders. So I think we really need long time series to disentangle this, but in the population, I think you're absolutely right. Trauma is one important factor that could contribute. And we discuss a lot now about boxing. People have started to talk about headers in football. Will that eventually translate into a risk factor for dementia? And that must be because it, to some degree, influences the brain. And I think there are big initiatives in the USA looking into National Football League players who have many injuries each year. And as sad as it is, it may give insight to answer your question in a better way.
Thank you very much.
And thank you, Lars. Then we'll move on to our next speaker.
You kick me out now, all right?
Yes,
thank you.
You're done. Lars, you're done.